Hello, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the New England Sports Weekly Podcast. As always, I am your host, Sean Metcalf, and I'm glad that you've decided to join me this evening. Or if you're listening on Spotify or SoundCloud or however you have decided to listen today, I'm glad that you're joining in and listening into this special episode, which is the NFL preview show. So it's going to be jam-packed here, not just Patriots. We'll touch on a few other Boston sports topics just in the beginning of the show in the out of the box segment, but it's mainly going to be heavily focused on the NFL, the Patriots, and we're going to touch a little bit of fantasy football here as well. So it's going to be jam-packed for you football heads out there, and I'm sure we'll be probably able to fill more than the usual hour to hour and a half episode. So there's going to be plenty to talk about. So we'll just jump right in to out of the box as the New England Patriots, as I'm sure by now a lot of you have heard, that Cam Newton was cut and Mac Jones was named the starter. Technically not really officially, but from all reports, when you're the only quarterback that's on the roster, of course you're going to be the starting quarterback of the team. Now, he played well in the preseason. He looked like an NFL quarterback, looked like a Patriot-style quarterback as far as being able to execute pre-snap and able to diagnose those defenses before anything happens, and was able to run that 2-minute offense. We'll get into this a little bit deeper here when we get into the actual breaking down the Patriots. But Mac Jones is now your starter for the New England Patriots for 2021 and moving forward. And it should be a bright future ahead for Mac, and it should be a pretty good first season with the weapons that they've surrounded him with. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But obviously that was the biggest news coming out of camp. And I remember I was sitting at work. I was doing my usual morning routine. I won't get into that, but you having my coffee and doing all that while I was at work. But basically, I remember hearing that on the radio that they had breaking news sounder, and sometimes you're listening to those shows and they like to fool around with you, and they like to joke and send, oh yeah, this was breaking news, and then it's, oh okay, so this somebody's favorite movie just got released, or like a trailer for Star Wars or some Marvel movie got released. Don't get me wrong, I love that stuff too. I mean, I could be on some type of nerd podcast here and I could talk about that all day long too, but I thought maybe that might be what's happening. But no, it was official breaking news that Cam Newton was cut. So that was pretty shocking to actually be honest, because I wasn't expecting that to happen. Even though if you've been listening to this podcast on and off or on the regular, you know that since the draft, I've been fully on board with Mac Jones as the starter. And I said that from day one, even though you all know that I wanted sorry about that. Lost the audio there for a second. Sorry. Saw something pop up. But you all know that I wanted Justin Fields as the starting quarterback for the Patriots as their first round draft pick. But I was all on board when it came to Mac Jones, so just because I still liked him, I just had him as the fifth quarterback where he ended up being taken, and I saw more of the end of the first, the beginning of the second round type of quarterback, so not really where I thought he would go towards the top of the draft, even with all the speculation. I was higher on Justin Fields, who going into the season might have been even the number 2 pick, and we all know how that changed, but basically I was high on Justin Fields, but I still liked Mac. And from day one, I wanted Mac to be the starter. So but the way things were building up here through camp and just the way that Belichick gave Cam more opportunities, I thought he'd still be on this team. But to everybody's, well, depending on what side of the fence you're on, if you're on the Cam or the Mac side, it all depends. But as far as Cam as far as Cam was concerned, that was a big surprise for me. I still thought he was going to be the starter week one, the way things had unfolded here the last week. Because things really massively changed since the last show. So that tells you that just tells you how drastic things had changed in the span of just even a week. But now Cam's gone, Mac's the starter. Now, some other Patriots-related news in the out-of-the-box segment is that Stephon Gilmore was placed on the injured reserve list. And it's not the season-ending injured reserve. This is the one where you're designated to return. So he could come back by week 6, depending on how that injury heals up. Now, there might be a little bit of gamesmanship here, too. Now, don't get me wrong. Stephon Gilmore did have a major injury last year that did sideline him towards the end of the season. So it's not exactly 100% that he's doing this for the contract. No, but this is more, to me, this is more a little bit of combination of both, where he's still working on the contract, but he still isn't fully healed from his injury last season. So we'll see how that works out. But that is kind of that's major news for that defense. Even though with all the revamping they've done there, Stephon Gilmore is still probably, if not the biggest piece to that puzzle. He's right there at number 2. I wouldn't go any further than number 2 as the biggest piece to that defense. But Stephon Gilmore right now will start the season on the PUP list. So we'll see how that all unfolds as we get further into the season here. And then as far as the Red Sox are concerned, oh boy. Every time you think things have hit rock bottom with this team, they just continue to find a way to disappoint you. Every single day. It's getting to the point of past frustration, just to disbelief with what's happening here. Now, they did play pretty well, albeit against some bottom feeder teams in Cleveland, Texas, over these last week and a half or so before they had to play Tampa, which now Tampa's showing that they're the class of not just the division, but of the American League, maybe even baseball. That's kind of tough to do when San Francisco and the Dodgers are out on the West Coast. But I digress from that standpoint. Just it's been really difficult for the Red Sox to get any traction going against any high-level teams like the Tampa Bay Rays, New York Yankees. And yes, I put the Yankees in there because unfortunately they've started to obtain that moniker now because they're playing really well. Yeah, they looked like they were going to be the bottom feeders in the first half, but wow. To quote a famous movie quote, how the turntables have turned. And yes, I know that's not how it really goes, but just look the quote up, people. Look it up. But basically, the Red Sox, what's happening now, the major news that's really got everybody in a funk as far as this disastrous second half has gone. Not that they're losing to the Rays. I kind of expected that the way this post-trade deadline is gone is the fact that they've lost an inordinate amount of starters to COVID. Now, to varying degrees, for those that have actually had COVID, to those that have COVID-like symptoms, to those that were in close contact that don't have it, but because of protocols from MLB and the Red Sox have had to sit out for an extended period of time. Now, obviously, if you do actually have COVID and if you don't have the vaccine, then your wait period to come back is a lot longer. If you have the vaccine, I'm not going to get into every single detail of it, but you catch the drift. Depending on if you have vaccine, if you don't, your severity, or if it's just close contact, then the timetable could vary when you could come back. But the real story about the whole situation is that they just keep losing, not just the Jairo Munoz, who just got put on there today, but you have Matt Barnes, who was put on the COVID list. Then you had Josh Taylor go on the list. You had Kike Hernandez, who was heating up at the leadoff spot, So you felt really good about where he was, but now you lose your best leadoff option. And then the big blow came yesterday, where in the second inning, Alex Cora had to come out and take Xander Bogaerts out of the game because he tested positive for COVID. So it's been a complete shit show as far as this is concerned. It's really, really has not been anywhere close to the same Red Sox team that we saw in the first half with the way that the team was playing nonetheless. And now you throw in this whole COVID monkey wrench to the situation, and this Red Sox team is on life support. They're only a game up on the Oakland A's for that last wild card spot. And now they're falling behind. The Yankees luckily have lost 2 in a row to the Angels. I believe that the Yankees did win today against the Angels, so that lead still remains 2 games for that first wild card spot. And Tampa is just running over the division. It's 10 games now, so I'm kissing the division. I kissed the division goodbye about a week and a half ago. I thought there still might be a chance, but just the way that the Red Sox even struggled to play against some of the crap teams in Cleveland and Texas and Minnesota, it was just hard to watch at times. But they still squeaked out wins. So I still thought that this team could grab one of those wild card spots. But just now with this avalanche of bad news with COVID, with the way that they're playing, the lack of play on defense, my God, they look like they're at times a little league team or some high school team in Class D. If you live in the state of Maine, you know what that means. They're just they seem like they're forgetting fundamentals, where to throw, what cutoff to hit, where they should be placed in the field at times. And then you throw into that Kyle Schwarber, yes, his bat is great. He's looked like the Kyle Schwarber before, obviously not the same home run clip that he was hitting. I mean, that's an all-time clip when he was hitting 16 home runs in 19 days with the Washington Nationals. You're not going to see that for a long time again. But the point being is that Kyle Schwarber, yes, he has a good bat. He's looked good since he's come to Boston. He's just struggled in the field at times. And of course, JD Martinez, well, yes, he did come up as a corner outfielder and has played some at time for the Red Sox. He's not bad. Some people will shit on him saying that he's not a good fielder. They'll want to bring up some of the sabermetrics. And trust me, I'm not going to sit up here and say that Martinez is going to win a Gold Glove anytime soon, or that he's going to be this stud outfielder for any standpoint. But he's serviceable. But that doesn't mean that I want him out there all the time. So the point being here is that you have some subpar defense all around, infield. In the outfield, the only one that you can rely on an everyday basis is Hunter Renfroe, who just came back off the bereavement list after his father passed away. So this team has just been a complete mess as far as from COVID, their lack of effort or play on the defensive side of the ball. And Nick Pivetta has turned back into a pumpkin, folks. He came over last year from the Phillies in that trade when they sent over Heath Hembree and Brandon Workman. And it looked like the Red Sox had absolutely stolen away 2 good pitching prospects. Although Pivetta is, I wouldn't call Pivetta, he's past the prospect stage, but you catch the drift there. He's 2 good pitching prospects. Now, Connor Siebold is the one that could be a nice middle of the order rotation, more stable than Pivetta, where I think Pivetta now being a full season in Boston, in the American League East, you're starting to see the warts. He looked really good in the first part of the season, and now where you needed him most to kind of find what he had back in May and June when he was pitching really well, looked like one of the top 3 pitchers on the staff, and you could count on him to give you good effort and get a win. He has just fallen off the face of the earth at this point. It's just been that bad. So really, this Red Sox team is in a bad situation as we head into into September, as it's September 1st today. So it's just not looking good for the Red Sox. Now, the good part is, like we mentioned before, they have a good schedule coming up as far as playing the Baltimores of the world, playing the bottom feeders. You do still have to play Tampa one more time and New York one more time and Chicago White Sox. But after that, you still have, I believe, 16 games left against some of these bottom feeder teams. So we'll see how this all works out for the Red Sox. Now, to the main entree, to the main course of this evening, we'll get right into the Patriots and the NFL preview show. Now, of course, we mentioned right off the top of the show, Cam Newton was a casualty of cutdown day as he was the biggest surprise, although depending on, like I said earlier, depending on what your thoughts about Cam were, maybe not such a surprise, but still it had to warrant at least you pausing for a couple minutes there and thinking, wow, they actually did pull the trigger on it, because the way things were going after the first 3 preseason games, or this year since they only play 3, Cam started all 3 of those games. Now, you figured he was going to start against the Washington football team. That wasn't a surprise. Then you kind of started to hear rumblings about Mac, because even he played well in all the pre-season mini camps. In training camp, he played well, but of course, you still knew the incumbent was Cam Newton. So you knew that at least Cam was going to get that first game with the starters. And then the Philly game came along. And then Cam only played, I believe it was the first 2 series against Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, say whatever you want, all the starters that they did not play in that game, they only played 4 altogether. So, I mean, essentially, Cam Newton played against the same squad that Mac Jones played against. But Mac Jones came in, all the stats aside, he came in, like I've mentioned repeatedly over the last 2 episodes, Mac Jones came in, executed old school Patriot style offense as far as came in, ran the no-huddle offense, was able to execute before the play, looked like what you would see out of, I'm not saying Mac is Tom Brady by any stretch, but I'm just saying what you saw out of early Tom Brady before anybody knew what he was going to be. When he went in, was able to manage the game behind the line of scrimmage before the play was snapped to a smaller degree than obviously what Brady's doing now, because now he's just mega mind out there where he can do anything he wants. I know everybody called Peyton Manning the chess master and everything along those lines, field general, whatever you want to throw at him, that he was arguably the smartest brain and people want to make that's ever been in football, yada, yada, yada. But, I mean, Tom Brady's surpassed Peyton Manning at that point. He's pretty much swallowed up every ounce of football knowledge there's ever been. So, obviously, Mac is nowhere close to that. He's not even he's 50 million galaxies away from that standpoint at this point in his career. But he's shown that he's smart. He's shown that he doesn't make mistakes. And if he does make a mistake, he's able to correct it immediately or very shortly thereafter. So Mac Jones came in, played exactly what you want to see out of a Patriots quarterback as far as what we've been used to over the last 20 years, what you've been used to in a Josh McDaniels system. And even, like I said, even though I wanted Justin Fields when this season kicked off, when the draft came around, I'm not going to sit. I'm not going to sit there and pout the whole time like, oh, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you trade for Justin Fields? Of course, after you watch what Mac has done, Mac is nothing. He was not a slouch coming out of college. I mean, the man finished 3rd in the Heisman Trophy voting and lost to his college teammate in Devontae Smith. But you're talking about a guy that threw for over 4,500 yards, had an amazing season, broke the records that Joe Burrow did the season before, who won the Heisman, who went number 1 overall. So you're not talking about some schlub out there or somebody that was just along for the ride, a la AJ McCarron or Greg McElroy in those especially McElroy in the early runs. And obviously he was like a 7th round, 6th round pick that did nothing. He was just a backup the whole time. And AJ McCarron had a little bit more talent. There was a little bit more to it there, but still he's been a career backup so far. And there were rumblings maybe he could start for a few teams, the Bengals, or before Josh Allen became what he was last year. There were rumblings maybe him in Buffalo. But basically what I'm getting at here is that this is not your average Alabama quarterback. This is the guy that has talent. He has a pretty good amount of talent. Now, obviously, he's in the Trevor Lawrence category, depending on what your thoughts about Zach Wilson and Trey Lance and Justin Fields are. Is he in there? Maybe, maybe not. Definitely not with Trevor Lawrence, but you could make the argument with Trey Lance and possibly with Fields, although Fields has more physical abilities. But basically what I'm getting at here is that when it comes to Mac Jones, I've adjusted my level of expectations, adjusted what I want out of Mac Jones and what I thought he was coming into training camp, mini camps, and in the preseason. I've really loved what I've seen out of him. Now, he's still got a long way to go. He's not even close to a finished product, but even in the early stages, like I said, if he makes a mistake, he doesn't repeat it. He's not out there. And now Cam didn't make a lot of mental mistakes. He made a lot of physical mistakes, fumbling the ball, not knowing where to go at times, throwing some interceptions. He was a little slower to process some of the Patriots system. And now I'm of the party that I don't use COVID as an excuse. I think that's a bunch of bullshit if you use COVID as an excuse for Cam last year, because those people that were sitting there and saying that, oh, Cam missed 10 days of practice, or they're trying to build that time period in from the Kansas City game into the week 5 game, because that would have been week 5 the next week, into that week 5 where they had to give him the time off. And there's about 10 to 12 days stretch where Cam couldn't physically be there. And people wanted to make out like this was still the old school day where there are going to be 3 or 4 not padded practices, but actual physical in-person practices. But obviously, remember last year, not because Cam had COVID, but because of the whole COVID situation, they had to do virtual practices, and they only had the one in-person physical practice. And Cam missed that one. But he could be there for all the rest of the virtual practices. Guess what? You have a cell phone, and I'm sure as hell that you could text Bill Belichick, text Josh McDaniels, your quarterback's coach, text anybody. For hell, text Brian Hoyer, who's been in and out of this system since he was drafted with the Patriots in 2009. And he's had a few, obviously, stints with other teams, but he's come back and he knows this system. So don't give me that excuse, that Cam had COVID and he had to miss time. And even Cam was like, it felt like I got left off the exit and I wasn't able back on the bus. And by the time blah, 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 I got back on. Yeah, don't give me that. You only missed one physical practice. And the rest of the time, guess what? Even people with COVID are allowed to be on Zoom, on video chats. You can do it. So you had plenty of opportunity to study the system. You had plenty of opportunity. Now, I'm not saying like physically what he was able when he came back from COVID, how his body reacted. Now, that's a different story. But I'm saying mentally, the system and what you're supposed to do, that's all mental, which you should be able to get during even those Zoom practices. So don't even feed me that. So if you're going to be one of those people that comes at me and tells me, oh, well, he missed all this time and finally he had this year. No, he had plenty of time last year. He had plenty of time this training camp. And Mac Jones showed that fair and square, he had the opportunity. And then guess what? Last week, Cam effed himself with that whole situation when he left the team. Now, nobody's going to know if it really truly was a medical situation or if he ended up seeing, like, if it was a medical situation or his family had a medical situation, there's a death in the family. Yes, that's where I'll reserve. That's the part where I will say, okay, you did the right thing, Cam. But if this is a situation where you left and there was no emergency, no family situation going on, whatever it may be, then that's where, and you just left just to go see somebody, go, I don't know, find something else. I'm not sure why he left, to be honest. But basically, when he left and had to miss those 5 days, now you screwed yourself on that one. You are already on thin ice for just playing poorly last year, and then just how things went with Cam. Now, he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't pull any Antonio Browns. He didn't do any of that type of stuff. So from that standpoint, of course, he was a model citizen from that standpoint. But when you have this situation where you already know that you have to be there, you have to show up and practice because Mac was not letting up. And then, of course, you miss 5 days, and now you're behind the 8 ball even more. So, of course, what do you expect to happen with the? Do you think the Patriots are going to be happy with you? Oh no, that's fine. Especially if there was no actual emergency or family situation that was happening, then of course they're going to be pissed off at you. If it's Belichick or if it's Josh McDaniels or whoever it ends up being, of course they're going to be mad. So you didn't do yourself any favors, Cam. And now Mac is here and here to stay. And now he's the starter. And instead of the future being next year or the year after, the future starts now. And man, does it look bright. And my God, was I so excited. Because just like I told you, just how things have gone in these last 2 preseason games for Mac Jones, and even more importantly, that joint practice against the Giants where it was all Mac, and he lit that practice up. We talked about it last week. So if you remember, he ended up going in the neighborhood of 35, completed 35 of 40 passes. And some reports have kind of varied, but it's all been in that 30 to 35, in that range. So Mac went in there, completed it, and when he got into the red zone, he was pretty damn near close to perfect in that joint practice on Wednesday. So Mac has done everything humanly possible to get that job, in my opinion. Now, did he go out there and throw 50 touchdowns during the preseason? I know I exaggerated, but you know what I mean. It's not like he went out there and lit the scoreboard up with touchdowns and 300-yard games and all that. But he pretty much lit up everybody's eyes if you were watching, just with how he executed that system. And you know he has the smarts to go in there and execute it the way that they want to. As far as this is going to be pretty much what you saw in 2001 through 2004 in that span where they won those 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, where it was basically built on that defense and built on just protecting the ball and opening it up a little bit when you have to. But of course, you're running the ball, throwing it, checking it down to tight ends, checking it down to your possession receivers. This isn't 2007 where the Patriots opened it up to Randy Moss and Brady broke records and Moss broke records. No, this is 2001 where it's complete total team football. Not like it hadn't been even after 07, but you know what I mean. It's where it's all complementary offensive football built on the defense. That's what you're going to see out of the Patriots. And Mac Jones in his first year, just the way that he was brought up in Alabama, this is going to be a perfect situation for him. Perfect. They have everything that he would need. Well, I shouldn't say everything. We'll get into that here in a moment, but he has a pretty decent toolbox to work with. Now the receiving core could use some work, but that tight end group, you have 2 studs at tight end in Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. And that's what I'm excited about here with this offense is that since 2010, now obviously Gronk, in my opinion, the greatest tight end of all time, because in his prime, we all saw he was an absolute monster. There's never been a tight end that was able to be a physical beast like that, but then at the line of scrimmage and knock you around. And he had fun just pancaking guys as a blocker. And then, oh yeah, guess what? I'll pancake you on my way to running a post down the middle or running some out route or running a little hook play, and then take it to the house after I push you over and Marshawn Lynch you basically and rumble 20 yards down the field and drag 3 bodies into the end zone. Yeah, of course. That Gronk in 2011 was otherworldly. That I don't think I know George Kittle and Travis Kelce yardage wise have broken that sense, but just with the touchdowns, the physicality that he brought, it was a complete game at tight end, and he continued obviously to do that until he started to get some injuries. And 2017 was that last true Gronk year, and then 2018 not really, and then last year after he came out of retirement and joined Brady in Tampa, that things weren't. It's not the same Gronk, but you catch the drift there. He's the greatest tight end of all time. And then you had in 2010, when they first came into the league, you had well, we can name him Aaron Hernandez, but a lot of people call him he who shall not be named for the things that he committed, those heinous acts. And I will, obviously, that's another story for another day, but I'm just talking solely about the football player. When those two came in, they were a dynamic tight end duo. 2011, obviously Gronk went off, but even Hernandez had a pretty solid season. You could split him out, do a lot of different things with him. Now, the Patriots, ever since obviously what the heinous things that Aaron Hernandez committed, they have been trying to find that second tight end to put with Gronk. And then after obviously Gronk did his whole song and dance with will I retire, will I not? Came back in 18, then retired in 19, and then obviously went off to Tampa. They've been trying to find the last 2 years at tight end in 2019 and then 2020 were complete black holes at tight end. So the Patriots love to run those two tight end systems, and you brought in Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. Now, Hunter Henry's more of the classic tight end, a little bit. He's obviously the more refined receiver, but he's more of, you kind of put him in line at tight end. He'll run the classic post routes, all the regular routes that you would normally see from a tight end. He's smooth with those routes. But then he's going to be more of he's going to be more of the safety valve, more of the reliable pass catching, do it all type of tight end. But then you have Jonnu Smith. To me, Jonnu Smith, he's the better tight end. He has more of a ceiling. I loved him in Tennessee. If you remember it back in 2019 in Brady's last game as a Patriot in that playoff game against the Titans, Jonnu Smith absolutely wrecked him. He had 2 receiving touchdowns. He looked so physical, and this is when he was basically breaking out at that standpoint. And he really hasn't, I wouldn't say he's had a breakout season, because last year he had over 400 yards with the 40 catches. So it's not like he's setting the world on fire, but I just don't think he was in the right system down in Tennessee, because they're more really run-oriented. I know the Patriots will be run-oriented, but they wouldn't even use the tight end. It was A.J. Brown and Corey Davis is all that pretty much caught passes. And then obviously 30 times a game, you stick it in the belly of not Hunter Henry, but Derrick Henry down in Tennessee. So pretty much this team, with what they have at tight end with Jonnu Smith, I love Jonnu Smith. He's going to be my new Binky as far as this Patriots team is concerned. I'm going to be so excited to see what they can do with him. He's more athletic. He's got more run after the catch ability. I think he's going to be one of those tight ends that you run, maybe you might try to run a screen with him. You try to get him in space. You might kind of run one of those hook plays, get him some bubble screens. You try to just get him find ways to get the ball into his hands so that he can try to get that yard after the catch. get 20, 30 yards down the field, rumble, run over some guys, a la Gronk, kind of be a mini Gronk, and just watch him go to work. And I think he's going to be a stud this year. For my expectations for Jonnu Smith is he's going to have a year where he gets, I'll say 930, just about 930 yards. He'll have 8 touchdown catches. And then with Hunter Henry, I think Hunter Henry will be right around where yardage-wise, where he normally sits, about 600 some odd yards, close to 700. And then he'll have, to me, 5 touchdowns. Because let's face it, the tight ends is what this offense is going to be built around passing-wise. I think that's where then it'll be Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne. That's where the rest of the offense will be built around. But it's going to be tight, passing-wise, tight end-centric. Now, obviously, that's all going to be built on if the 2 tight ends can stay healthy. Both of them have already been banged up. Neither one of them have been serious. They've pretty much held Hunter Henry out just because they know he's a veteran. He's 27, 28 years old. So he's still young, and but he's a veteran there. So they know he knows what to do. He's been around the league long enough. So they'll just put him on ice because he had the shoulder injury. And then you had Jonnu Smith with the ankle injury, but again, not serious. And he did go back into the preseason, but you didn't see him a lot. So pretty much at this point, they're just putting both of those 2 on ice until September 12th. Then they'll unleash the beast there at Foxborough against Miami. And you'll see a massive, massive improvement at tight end. And of course, we just talked about the wide receiving core, which they revamped, where they picked up Nelson Aguilar, brought in Kendrick Bourne. So those were the 2 big ticket items, or quote unquote big ticket items, even though I wouldn't put either one of them in the big ticket bin, pretty much. To me, there were 3: Kenny Golladay, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Curtis Samuel. Those were the ones to me that I would have, because at this point, AJ Green is past his prime, so I'm not going to even put him in that. If he was in his prime, of course, he would have been the number 1 target for me. But you brought in 2 decent wide receivers. Nelson Aguilar was teetering on being a first-round bust, had a decent last year in Philly, but still, it's nowhere near where they wanted him to be. So he left town, didn't live up to the expectations in Philly, had struggled with drops, then still struggled with drops last year out in not Oakland, but in Las Vegas. He still struggled with the drops, but he had a little bit more consistency than he normally did. So he had over 900 yards receiving. He's fast, so he does have some explosiveness to it, elements that he can bring to this offense. It's just, again, this is going to be more of a 50-50 guy as far as will he catch it, will he not? There'll be times where he'll frustrate the hell out of you. But if he's able to hold on to it, he's got the speed, he's got playmaking ability. He struggles with the drops, and he's more just the vertical guy. You're not going to see Nelson Aguilar out there running a gigantic route tree. So he's a decent option. I think he's a little overpaid, but it's definitely an upgrade. You didn't have anybody even close to that, which is kind of sad. Well, I shouldn't say close because you had Myers, who we get into here in a second. So you have Nelson Aguilar. Then you brought in Kendrick Bourne, who, to me, I liked him in San Francisco. I didn't love him. He was more of a complimentary piece, more of your 3rd, 4th receiver, a possession guy. I think he'll have a decent year. He'll be a 3rd wide receiver. He'll be more of a clone to me of what Jacoby Myers is, a little bit smaller. But I like him. In this offense, I think he'd be better suited if he was that 4th option, not really that 3rd. And depending on how you view Nelson Aguilar, if he's just more of that outside, just chuck it deep guy, and he's not in there he's only on there when you kind of need to, when you're like at 3rd and 8, 2nd and 10, something like that, where you're looking to pick up a chunk. So depending on how you kind of flip-flop that situation with wide receiver, I think there might be a little too much on the plate for Kendrick Bourne. But luckily, if you flip that over to a guy we just mentioned in Jacoby Myers, I do like what I've seen out of Jacoby Myers. Now, when he first came out in 2019, he was a good story out of camp, the NC State product. I remember actually seeing him live down at camp, and he looked pretty good. You said maybe there might be something there, keep that streak of undrafted free agents on the team, and lo and behold, he did. He didn't really make an impact the first year, but last year, yeah, I know Edelman was hurt. You had to deplete it. You didn't have any wide receivers after that. But Jacoby Myers actually had a solid season, had 723 yards receiving, was the best receiving option on that team. And he proved that he's really good, that he's reliable. And then this year in the offseason, mini camps, training camp, and then the joint practices and preseason, he's proving to be a pretty good player. They might have found something here. Now, is he going to be a true number one? He's probably more of a number two. I wouldn't call him a true possession guy because he's not god awful molasses slow, offensive lineman slow. To me, he's kind of got a little bit of Anquan Bolden to him as far as the speed element. So he's not going to break anything away. He's not going to throw out Antonio Brown in his prime or whoever you want. Tyreek Hill. Of course, he's not going to got burner speed. He wouldn't have been an undrafted free agent. But the point is that he's going to be a reliable target for Mac Jones. He's got good hands. And when you get the ball in his hands, he's secure with the ball. He makes good plays. And we know he can throw the ball because he was a former quarterback. He was recruited as a quarterback to NC State, switched over to wide receiver. But so he can play it. He can be one of those kind of gadget players at times at the wide receiver slot. But again, he's going to be the leading receiver on this team. Catch-wise, probably yardage-wise too. I think that's where he'll be. To me, he's going to be the only receiver on the team that goes over 1,000 yards. I think this year he'll be in that Edelman territory of like 1,050 some odd, 1,070 some odd yards. Touchdown wise, I'm not going to obviously predict a ton of touchdowns. I think if he gets into that four to five touchdown range, that would be good because of course you're going to get more touchdowns coming from the running game, throwing to James White and throwing to the two tight ends. That's where a lot of those passing, that's where the touchdowns are mainly going to come from. But I like what you have in Jacoby Myers. I'm not going to call him like a star or a stud, but I think they have a good piece here. Now, this is something that in the future, you bring in that number one, and then you have a nice number two in Jacoby Myers or a guy that you can put back into the slot more often. So I like Myers. Like I said, not a true number one, but he'll be for this year for what this team wants to do. You don't have to have the number one. It'd be nice to have the number one. You'd love to have a number one and upgrade it. But with the two tight ends and what they have, I think you'll have enough to get by. Now, the Patriots running attack, that's going to be what really drives this offense because they did trade away Sony Michel, but they pretty much had moved on to Damian Harris as their lead back anyways. And Belichick pretty much said so at the start of training camp. And Damian Harris last year, before he dealt with some injuries, he looked pretty good. That Kansas City game, he was ripping off some pretty big chunks. And against the first Buffalo game, he looked pretty good too. So, and Damian Harris, to me, after redshirting his first year in 2019, I'm just not sure why he did, to be honest. That was kind of weird. But anyways, he came out in that second year, his first year of really playing at all. He looked pretty good. He looked like he was going to be on the rise. And, of course, with New England, you can never really tell because they use that running back by committee system. But last year, he and Michelle, when they were splitting carries, they looked pretty good. They were a two-headed, I wouldn't say monster, but they were a pretty good two-headed attack that you could not just say, okay, they just have let's throw out a Benjarvis Green Ellis or Sammy Morris, where guys that were capable but weren't great. No, these guys they're not a Dalvin Cook. They're not an Alvin Kamara. They're not a Saquon Barkley, not a Derrick Henry. So they're not going to be in that stratosphere. But I think Damian Harris is a good back. He's got some power. He's got enough speed, not gigantic 50, 70-yard runs, but he's got good legs, got good speed where he can make some good plays for you. Power. He's not a true power back, but he's got enough power where you don't have to bring in that hammer, that Garrett Blunt type of running back to spell him when you get towards the goal line. No, he's good. He's a good back, and they're going to give him the ball probably, in my opinion, this year. I think they're going to see a little bit less of the committee from the standpoint of they're going to run it so much that I think he's going to get a bulk of the carries, probably 15 to 20 carries a game, which that's pretty good. And then that's where you'll see probably in some of those games that are going to be a little bit more pass heavy. That's where you'll see James White and some JJ Taylor come, and they'll both have some good speed, some good catching ability where they can break off and make plays in that passing attack. But then if you're going to focus mainly on the run, I think this is where you're going to see a heavy dose of Damian Harris. So he's, in my eyes, I think he's going to be a really, really good player this year for this Patriots team. And then, of course, you have Ramondre Stevens, who in the preseason really impressed me, really did. He came out there. He, to me, speaking of LeGarrette Blount, kind of seemed like a mini LeGarrette Blount. He's a little bit smaller, but he has some of that power with a little bit better vision and just a touch more speed. It wouldn't be, if you put the two side by side, I don't think you maybe he might be a step faster, but not anywhere. You're not talking about CJ2K type of speed at running back, but you are having a good complementary backup. So I would feel good if, I mean, obviously he's still not proven in the regular season, but at least what I saw in the postseason, because running backs are the one thing that in the preseason, that's going to be the closest thing. It's going to be the closest thing to a sure thing you can judge. Quarterbacks, defensive players, where there's scheme involved against some of the backups, that's where it's going to be hard to judge. But with a running back, when you kind of stick the ball into their hands, into their gut, and you just tell them to hit the gap, try to find that hole, that's going to be a little bit more truer to what you're going to see. So in that standpoint, I feel not like at 80% comfortable with this, but I probably feel somewhere in the neighborhood of 65, 70% comfortable if you had to turn it over to Ramondre Stevens, if you had to turn him into lead back. Then, of course, Belichick would probably sign somebody off the street, or depending on the situation, you obviously are going to put JJ Taylor in there. You'd have some solid options to go to. But to me, honestly, they have a nice stable of running backs even after trading Sony Michel. So I like what they've done on offense. Now, the big additions came in the offseason with the defense. Now, the Patriots signed probably the best in my opinion, the best pass rusher on the market, the most versatile anyways, when they brought over Matthew Judon from the Baltimore Ravens. His stat sheet's not going to blow you away. He gets 7-8 sacks a year, 9 sacks. I mean, he's not going to be your Chandler Jones after he got traded to the Cardinals, where he's getting close to breaking the single season sack record. He's out there getting 12.5 sacks a season, it seems like, every year. No, he's not going to be in that situation. But you're talking about a guy that in the preseason, he absolutely stood out in the best way possible. He made play after play after play when he was in there on the first teamers in like those first couple of series when they would let him play. I remember that. I know it's Joe Flacco and the Jets. I'm sorry, the Eagles. That's where he is now. He strip sacked Joe Flacco, and that was a beautiful play. And then he's made some pretty good plays here, even in the preseason, where it just makes you be like, that reminds me of a linebacker a la Mike Vrabel, a little bit of Teddy Bruschi, and a skosh of McGinnis as far as kind of the where you can put him at outside linebacker, move him onto the defensive end of the defensive line if need be, but that quote unquote elephant role where you have more versatility. He's just a guy that has a combination of speed and power that he's going to be unbelievable with how Belichick's going to use him. And with the beef that they brought into the defensive line and Devin Godchow and Henry Anderson, who I was a little unsure with those guys, but they played decent in the preseason, and they're eating up the middle there. So they're not just there, a la, I don't know, Silver Salinga, or I don't know, throw out one of those kind of big bodies that Belichick has kind of brought in the past that and like last year where they didn't have really anybody. It was pretty much Lawrence Guy, and at times you had Adam Butler, but Adam Butler from time to time would be missing. You'd be on the milk crate. So they didn't have anybody outside of Lawrence Guy that you could really rely on. So they beefed up that defensive line. And then, oh yeah, you brought in this rookie and Christian Barmore, who, yeah, he may just be a rotational guy to start the season, but even the preseason, he's blown up that pocket. He's pushed linemen back into the quarterback, and he's allowed guys like Matthew Judon or some of those edge rushers to get in and make plays. So I like what they've done. And I know people are blind the next guy I'm about to talk about, but you and Chase Winovich, but even if you have Barmore, you have Dante Hightower, you have Matthew Judon, you have Lawrence Guy on that line in the linebacking core, then that allows him to do his specialty and get in there for that sack. Now, he's going to have times where it infuriates you and you want to rip out your hair, but he is no longer going to be the lead dog as far as the pass rush is concerned, which if he's your lead dog in pass rush like he was last year, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. But the whole point here is that they beefed up that defensive line, so you're putting guys into the positions that they should be. And then obviously you have a stud in Matthew Judon. And then you have Dante Hightower, who came back after declining to play last year for personal reasons when they gave players an opt-out because of COVID. So he's back. And if he can be anywhere close to what Dante Hightower is, even though he's 31 years old, that's still a good linebacker that you have. And then obviously you have Kyle Van Noy that you brought back. And then you can slide Jawan Bentley back into that third, fourth linebacker. Terez Hall is coming on. So now you're just building depth, but not just depth. You have good depth that you have there because you have Hightower and Van Noy playing again as your lead linebackers. And then you have, like I said, you have Matthew Judon and Lawrence Guy and Dietrich Wise, the guys that you can trust that are good players that are out there. You're not relying on scrubs to fill positions like you were last year. So I like where they are. I really love that defensive front. And of course, secondary is the one area where you kind of have to I should say corner, because right now you don't have Stephon Gilmore. He's on the pup. It'll be interesting to see how he comes back. So after J.C. Jackson. So J.C. Jackson is a legitimate number 2. He was the best number 2 in football last year. Now as a number 1, when Stephon Gilmore went down, he struggled against Stephon Diggs, got absolutely lit up on that Monday Night Football game late in December. But thank you, because I know this kind of is weird, but I had Stephon Diggs on my fantasy team and he won me a championship. So that's besides the point, but that was the only good thing about that whole game. But going back to being a Patriots fan on that sucked because you're watching him get his lunch handed to him against a really good wide receiver. So it'll be interesting to see here in the early going, because you do have to face Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker in week 1. So you're not exactly facing slouches at the wide receiver position in week 1. So we'll see how that goes for J.C. Jackson. But if he can prove that he's more than just a number 2 that plays against a defensive player of the year in Stephon Gilmore, where he's playing beside him, then you'll have something. At least at least you have Jackson, but after Jackson, that's where it kind of gets murky because then it's Jawan Williams, who's a bigger corner, but he has a lot of ups and downs. They drafted him in the second round back in 2019, so things are kind of up in the air there. A lot of people thought he might be on the bubble, but he's still he made the cut. And then you have Jonathan Jones, who's more of a slot guy, so you don't want to stick him on the outside unless you absolutely have to. And then you have to trade a Shaun Wade from the Baltimore Ravens, which that's interesting because you're not sure what he's going to be because he was like I said, he's a rookie this year out of Georgia in Shaun Wade, and Ohio State. But anyways, the whole point here with Shaun Wade is that he's got a lot of potential. He was rumored to be a top 15 pick if things hadn't have gone south for him as far as dealing with some injuries. And then last year with COVID, the opt-out, and things just didn't break the right way for Shaun Wade. But he's got talent there, so maybe Belichick might have found a diamond in the rough there. We'll find out. And then, of course, you look at the safety position. That I feel a lot better about because you still have Adrian Phillips, who was a Swiss Army knife there last year. You still have Devin McCourty, the veteran. Yeah, he might be getting a little long in the tooth, but he's still a wily veteran and still played well last year. And then you have Kyle Duggar, who is morphing into being a pretty good young safety. You did lose Patrick Chung, who retired, but you have a pretty good core at safety. It's the corners after you lose Gilmore. That's where it scares me because you don't know if you have that true number one, and that forces everybody else to play out of position, kind of, in a way. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, as far as who I think is going to be a breakout star for the Patriots, if we picked on offense for a breakout star, to me, that's easy for me. That's Damian Harris. Now, I already talked about I think Damian Harris is a good back, but I think Damian Harris has enough power and just enough speed to get into that top maybe 15, top 12 running backs in the league, and hell, maybe into that top 10 from the standpoint of maybe even statistically, because like I said, this is going to be a year where Belichick has seen he saw a lot of him in camp. He's trusted him. And this is a guy that I think is capable of being a discounted bell cow. Now, when I say discounted, I mean that he's not going to be in the Derrick Henry, the Dalvin Cook realm where they're absolute studs, where they're all pros. They're the best backs each and every game that they play in. But this is where I think you're not just talking about, this is a Ben-Jarvis Green-Ellis. You can find him a dime a dozen. Damian Harris has some ability, so I think you're going to see a guy that, in my opinion, total yardage, I think you're going to see 1,500 yards out of Damian Harris. You're going to see, in my opinion, you're going to see 1,300 yards, give or take, on the ground, and then roughly around 200 some odd yards receiving. So I think he'll do just enough receiving. I think you'll see him in a couple games there, maybe catch a screen, catch a few passes out in flat on a couple checkdowns. I don't think you're going to get anywhere near to James White, where James White catches about 40, 50 balls and has 500 some odd yards receiving, close to 600 yards receiving with 6 touchdowns like he has in the past. But I think this is where you'll see maybe a back that's going to be on the complete, closest to a complete back that we've seen that's able to run and catch, not a Sony Michel where it was kind of like you saw a guy in Georgia in that title game where he caught a lot of passes, ran pretty well, and you thought you were going to get a guy that was going to be a dual threat back. Now, I'm not saying Damian Harris is going to be anything close to what Alvin Kamara is and being pretty much a wide receiver at running back who can rush for 1,000 yards too, but I think you're going to get a guy where he's more complete than we've seen in a while in this Patriots offense. So I think he's ticketed for a big year. And then on the defensive side of the ball, for me, again, I know this is low-hanging fruit, but it's Christian Barmore. To me, Christian Barmore is a guy that I think as we get probably to like week 6, week 7 in the season, he'll start to get more and more reps where he's out there every probably two of 3 reps, 2 or 3 downs, I should say. He's gonna. I don't think he'll be at that point where he's a 3-down guy maybe till later in the season, but I think this is where he's shown a lot to me just in the preseason, where he has the ability to crush the pocket, push linemen back, and disrupt and give guys like Matthew Judon time to get to the quarterback. And I think this is a guy that in maybe not this year, but I think this is a guy where you might start to see him get what you've seen out of a lot of the nose tackles. Now, Aaron Donald is way, way out there, but maybe guys like Chris Jones in Kansas City, where he's a good nose tackle that does create pressure. So I think this is a guy as we get later on into year, as Belichick finds more ways to use him, is a guy from the middle of that defensive line is going to cause havoc and going to cause pressure on opposing offenses with just his skills and abilities, where this is a guy that they were talking about taking in the first round, not the Patriots, but other teams taking him in the first, and the Patriots were able to snag him with the 38th overall pick in the second. So this is a guy that I really like what I've seen from him in the offseason. Now, obviously, depending on, hopefully he doesn't go the whole Chase Winovich route where he stays a rotational player all season long, but I don't think so. I've seen enough out of him in the preseason where he could be a pretty special player on defense. So I really like what I've seen out of Christian Barmore out of Alabama. He's going to be a good young player this year for the Patriots. So again, the offensive player is Damian Harris, and my breakout defensive player is Christian Barmore. Now, as we slide over to the rest of the league, we'll dive into an area where I know this is New England Sports Weekly Pod, but I mean, come on, the NFL itself is one of the biggest sports leagues in the world. Obviously, FIFA, Premier League, Champions League, all those, and then when you get into Formula One and some of those type of racing, those are the big sports leagues out there. But I mean, the NFL in America, anyways, is king in the United States. That rules the sporting landscape. And I'm right there with them. I love waking up on Sunday mornings, watching the NFL Network, watching a little bit of the 4-letter network as well, watching the pregame for 4 hours, setting my fantasy lineup, just scrounging up everything I can during the week. Yeah, trust me, I watch some of those crappy Thursday night football games. I'll watch some of those type of Monday night football games, but I'll sop it all up. No matter how crappy it is, I'll sit there and watch it most of the time because I have somebody on my fantasy team that's playing on one of those crappy games. But I do love watching those games. I'm sitting down there on a Sunday from 1:00 till 11:30 or whenever the last second ticks off on that Sunday night football game. I'm in it from second one to the last second. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of you listening to this podcast that are in that same situation, that are junkies like me when it comes to football. So without further ado, we'll get into the NFL preview. Now, as far as the rest of the league, we talked about the Patriots ad nauseum in this episode. But as far as the rest of the league, when it comes to those contenders, who are those true contenders in the NFL? Not just the AFC, not just the NFC, but who are those true contenders? Now, obviously, we know Tampa. They won the Super Bowl. They brought everybody back. They're going to be who everybody's chasing. And why wouldn't you? You have the GOAT as your quarterback. Tom Brady's looking to get ring number 8. They're loaded on offense, loaded on defense. Young players on that defensive side of the ball, by the way, especially that linebacking core. So that could be scary for them. And then receiving wise, You have Chris Godwin again, Mike Evans, who I know some people, especially if you're in the fantasy world, kind of bitch about the efficiency. But I mean, come on, the man still had double-digit touchdowns and over 1,000 yards. Man's a stud. 7+ years of over 1,000 yards. Man's a stud. Then you have Antonio Brown, who's your third receiver, and I think he's still got enough left in the tank. So if he's your third, along with those two studs at receiver, and then your tight end group, obviously you have Gronk, and then you have O.J. Howard, who will be coming back this year. So Brady didn't have a lot of O.J. Howard last year. I think he went out week 3, I believe. So you don't have a lot to go on. You didn't have a lot of O.J. Howard last year. And yeah, he's kind of been a little bit of an enigma, but I think with Brady, I think he could be a nice complementary piece to Gronk. And then you have Cameron Brate. So that tight end group is pretty good. I don't think it's anywhere where the Patriots' 2 tight ends are, because I think those 2 tight ends for the Patriots are in their prime. Gronk no longer in his prime. If Gronk was in his prime still, I mean, that'd be no contest. Gronk and O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, see you later. Best tight end group in the NFL by a long shot. But anyways, it's not the same, but still good tight ends that they have there. Gronk is still very capable, but he's not 2011, 2014, 16 Gronk anymore. But that they're definitely the number one dog everybody's chasing. And then if you look, obviously in the AFC, you have the Kansas City Chiefs. We all know Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. I mean, you can't get a better trio than that in the NFL as far as quarterback, tight end, wide receiver. That they pretty much are setting records or getting close to setting records every year. And I know some people get sick of Patrick Mahomes. Oh, they overrate him. They pump him up, blah, blah, blah. But man, come on. He's the real deal. You can't deny that. Patrick Mahomes is the real deal. He is the best. He's the best quarterback right now in the NFL. And of course, I love Tom Brady to death. He's the GOAT. He's always going to be my favorite player of all time. I mean, I'm a Patriots fan. How can he not be? I'm not going to rehash the whole story with Tom, but if you're a Patriots fan, you know. But you can't deny the greatness of Patrick Mahomes as far as him being currently the best player in the NFL. So, and that Chiefs team did load up on the offensive line. They brought in former Patriot Joe Thuney at guard, and he is one of the better guards in football. So they beefed up that line, which was trouble for them last year. And then they get Levant D. Tardif, one of those tricky names, French-Canadian names. After he last year, he's coming back after he was helping with the whole COVID situation up in his home country of Canada. And he is a pretty good offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman for the Chiefs as well. So they get help back there. Defensively, they're not, I don't think they're going to be anywhere where the Patriots or the 49ers are going to be, but they're still a pretty solid group there. Tyrann Mathieu, Chris Jones, they have good players. They have good coaching there with Spags. So it's a good group on the defensive side. So, of course, Tampa and Kansas City are the cream of the crop when it comes to the top tier of the NFL. But then one of the contenders out there that, to me, is people are sleeping on is going to be Sanford. Not that I wouldn't say completely sleeping on, but just because of how things went last year. And you're talking about the San Francisco 49ers, who were just 2 years removed from a Super Bowl appearance. And if it wasn't for Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo having a bad fourth quarter, we'd be talking about them as the next young dynasty potential in this league. Now, that's going to be the key this year, is keeping that, especially the offense, healthy, because George Kittle, in my estimation, is the best tight end in football. He is. I mean, he reminds me of what Gronk was in his prime. He's just a tad bit smaller, not a lot, but he's one of those guys that absolutely is a stud once you get him the ball. He's he's an absolute machine. He catches basically whatever you throw to him. I believe last year in a game against the Eagles, I think it was 19 or 20 passes he caught. I could be wrong, but it just seemed like that. But he caught a lot, and he'll get you. He might not get 12 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns a season, just because the way that they run the offense. But basically what I'm saying is that if you keep the best, in my opinion, the best tight end in football healthy, along with having Brandon Ayuk and having Deebo Samuel, who Deebo Samuel is just in the George Kittle boat where he's good. You just have to keep him healthy. So if you can keep those two healthy and keep Ayuk healthy, and of course you have Raheem Mostert, who I like Mostert. He's not, like I said, he's not a top tier running back, but he is explosive. But his issue is just staying healthy. And then of course you have to deal with them picking up Trey Sermon out of Ohio State. So they have a pretty good running back core after adding Trey Sermon. So just in case you do end up losing Raheem Mostert, or if Sermon ends up supplanting him later on in the season, they have a pretty good young linebacking core. But of course, where their bread is buttered is on the defensive side of the football. I mean, that defensive front is just enormous. I mean, you have Nick Bosa, who is an absolute stud. He's better than his brother Joey. I mean, Nick Bosa is an animal. He's to me, he's one of my favorite defensive players to watch in Bosa. Is he just gets after the quarterback. And then you have you don't have DeForest Buckner. He went to the Colts, but you still have Armstead. You still have beef on that front line. And then Fred Warner is an absolute stud at linebacker. In the secondary, you did end up losing Richard Sherman, but he was getting long in the tooth. So you do have Verrett. So you have some pieces in the secondary. That's where they're going to struggle a little bit this year. Is going to be the secondary. It's not what they had 2019, but still with Joey Bosa, with Nick Bosa back and healthy, with Fred Warner healthy, with that front seven that they have, to me they have enough where they're going to be able to get to the quarterback before that secondary gets exposed. So that defense is going to be what carries them to being a true contender. And of course, the X factor in all of this is going to be the quarterback position for them, because you have Jimmy Garoppolo, who we all know and love him from here. But again, that's another one that's just the theme when it comes to San Francisco on offense, is just staying healthy, because Jimmy has had trouble staying healthy. So that's obviously why they traded up to the third overall pick, and they picked Trey Lance with that, who I like Trey Lance. I wasn't as high on him as other people were. To me, I had Trey Lance as the fourth quarterback. I had Trevor Lawrence, obviously number one. Then I had Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, then Trey Lance and Mac Jones. But as far as the potential that he brings, we saw him make a couple good throws in the preseason. He had a dart, that 80-yarder. So he looks really good. He can move. So they like what they've seen so far, although now he's dealing with a thumb injury. I don't know how serious things are for him, but we'll see how that goes for Trey Lance and the 49ers. But to me, it's just all about them staying healthy when it comes to the 49ers and them being that true contender, because defensively, that front seven, love them. They're going to be a stud group to watch, especially with Nick Bosa back and healthy. It's just going to be all about that quarterback position and what they do with it if Jimmy G stays healthy and if Trey Lance is what the Niners thought they were getting in the number 3 overall pick. And of course, the last contender that I'll throw out here for the NFC is going to be the Green Bay Packers. This one's a little interesting just from the standpoint, not because obviously we all know Aaron Rodgers is going to be a Hall of Famer. He's a great quarterback. But how interested, how engaged is he going to be with this franchise? We all saw how things went in the offseason. Were they going to go for a divorce? Were they going to trade him to Denver? Were they going to trade him to Las Vegas? Was he going to be out of town? It sure seemed like that, but they kissed and made up, quote unquote. But they did have to make some concessions. They went out and traded for Randall Cobb from the Cowboys, who Randall Cobb in this point in his career is not what he used to be when he first came to Green Bay. But it looks like they may be trying to at least appease him a little bit. Now, offensively, they still have Jones at running back, Aaron Jones, and Devontae Adams, who Devontae Adams is, in my opinion, the best receiver in football right now. He just has everything you would want. Maybe not the size, but he's fast, great route runner, very instinctive. Aaron Rodgers can go to him at any time. Last year, he had 17 receiving touchdowns. For a moment, it looked like he might break Randy Moss's record, but slowed down there towards the end. But they have a best receiver in football that they can sit there and rely on. They have a good running game. And depending on how the rest of that receiving core goes, that's always a situation when it comes to Aaron Rodgers is the secondary options. Now, I do like Robert Tonyan, the tight end. He was a pretty good diamond in the rough type of piece that they were able to find later there in the season. And now he worked out with George Kittle and a lot of those Iowa Hawkeyes that are just absolute studs in the NFL when it comes to tight ends. So he was out there working out with a lot of those guys, and then he turned into something pretty good for Aaron Rodgers. He was a good red zone target for you. To me, it's just going to be, how does the behind the scenes situation go with Aaron Rodgers? That's kind of really it's going to dictate if they're going to be a true contender. It's not a lot of what we saw before, like I talked about with San Francisco or Tampa or with Kansas City, where they're pretty much set in stone. This is just more, will Aaron Rodgers be happy? Will Aaron Rodgers feel like he's getting what he deserves as far as weapons on that offensive side of the football and defensive side of the football to win and get into the Super Bowl, which he is desperately trying to get into since he was there in 2010 and won. He hasn't been back. So far, he's been a one and done in the Super Bowl. He hopes to turn that around. But those are the four teams that really sit at the top of the NFL. Will there be another one that can crack that? Now, as far as for me, there are two teams. There are really just two teams, because to me, the NFC is top heavy. It's Tampa, San Francisco, and Green Bay. After that, I wouldn't put Seattle in that category, even though you have Russell Wilson. Defensively, they're a mess on the defensive side of the football. Offensively, you have two stud wide receivers in Lockett and DK Metcalf. Chris Carson's a solid running back, but defensively, they're just kind of a mess. So I wouldn't put him there. To me, the Rams, I'm not a huge believer in Matthew Stafford as far as him being a true championship pedigree quarterback. If he was that good of a quarterback where you had Megatron, you had Kenny Golladay, you had good weapons out in Detroit, but all he did was collect stats. He never made it past the first round of the playoffs because he only went twice, I believe, with Detroit. He's never been that type of quarterback that I have true confidence in. Okay, we may win 9, 10 games, 11 games, but guess what? He craps his pants in the playoffs. He's been surrounded with weapons. Now, I know you can make the argument about coaching and not having defensive weapons. I get it. Now he's going to the Rams, where you have Aaron Donald, you have Jalen Ramsey. So I think the Rams, to me, obviously they're going to get a wild card spot because I think San Francisco is going to win the West. But to me, I just don't see Matthew Stafford as being this otherworldly quarterback, this guy that's going to push you over the top. Now I know Jared Goff, everybody makes fun of him, but still he helped bring that team along with that defense to that Super Bowl in 2018. He was collecting stats that year and these other years. I don't see what everybody else has seen and what the Rams did with Matthew Stafford. Now, if you're playing fantasy football, go ahead, take Matthew Stafford. He's got all those weapons out there. That'll be fun for you. And if I take Matthew Stafford, it'll be fun for me watching him. But in reality, I just don't see what he's going to bring to the table as far as pushing this team over the top. He didn't do that in Detroit when he had offensive weapons. So I don't see them as a true contender out there in the West. So there are two interesting. Now, I know that we've kind of turned this into the NFC West portion of the show, but another situation out there in Arizona, Kyler Murray, that's a little bit more interesting. I do like Kyler Murray. He's a good dual threat quarterback. If he can learn to be a little bit more accurate with the football, he has DeAndre Hopkins. He brought in AJ Green, who could be a nice compliment. You still have Christian Kirk. And then at running back, you have a decent stable with Chase Edmonds out there. It'll be interesting. I'm not entirely bought into that team just because defensively they have question marks. On the offensive line, they have some as well. So it'll be interesting to see what Arizona can do. I'm throwing them into that same situation with the Rams, be competing for a wild card spot, but I don't put them in the true contender spot just yet. So to me, it's going to be on the AFC side of the football or side where you're going to find those true contenders that might crack into the next level. And for me, it's obviously Buffalo. Buffalo is in the AFC Championship game, playing Kansas City. Now, I know the game was closer than it should have been because you lost Patrick Mahomes for a little bit, and it was Chad Henne. And for a moment there, it looked like the Buffalo Bills might sneak into the Super Bowl, but they ended up losing. So that was kind of a shame. But I think if Josh Allen can show that he's consistent and then that last year wasn't a fluke, then the Buffalo Bills have something there because you have Stephon Diggs, who last year showed that he could be a true number one in a system where they rely on him because Minnesota, they just, for some reason, they never truly went to Stephon Diggs as that number. As a true number one, they split more time with Adam Thielen, but strangely enough, for his replacement in Justin Jefferson absolutely had an amazing rookie season. So he went in and looked like a true number one, which they never really treated Stephon Diggs like. Yeah, he had good seasons there. He was a good wide receiver. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything was wrong with Stephon Diggs there, but he's gone into the system where you are the number one. We're going to give you a close to 30% share of the targets, which a 30% share when you have 5 wide receivers, depending on what your team is, how it's built, that's a shit ton of targets. That's a lot of targets. So they have a good young quarterback that if he can continue his growth from last year, that's going to be amazing, really amazing for the city of Buffalo. That's going to be entertaining for Bills Mafia up there to watch. Now, as a Patriots fan, those are going to be some tough games. They were last year, but now with the good defense and hopefully Mac, maybe they'll have a shot at getting back to the heyday, which sounds weird because that was only a couple of years ago when it was Brady and Belichick ruling the AFC East. We'll see, but it'll be a nice rivalry that they'll have. But to me, Buffalo, they have a good, and then you have to throw in Cole Beasley, as long as he's not out there shooting off on social media about all the COVID crap or whatever is going on. He's a good number 2. He's a good slot receiver. You did lose John Brown, so that might hurt him a little bit. Running room wise, they don't run a lot, so I'm not big on that. But defensively, they have some nice pieces there. You have Tre'Davious White. To me, that's a defensive unit that I think they'll stay kind of where they were last year. I don't think they're going to take a step up into the top 10, but it's still going to be a defensive unit that can sneak a few victories out there if they need to. So I think that's a Buffalo team that's going to be in that 13, 14 win range, going to be right there for that number 2, maybe push Kansas City out of the way for a number 1, but it's going to be hard to with Patrick Mahomes at the helm. But Buffalo, to me, they're going to be that one team that can take that step into the true contender category this year. And then this is going to be one that could be controversial here for people, is going to be Cleveland for me. I've always believed in Baker Mayfield, and I think this is the year where he, not an all-pro, but I think this is going to be the year where Baker Mayfield puts up 35-plus touchdowns. You have OBJ coming back. Jarvis Landry's always a solid target. You have a good core of young tight ends out there. So I like what this team has. And to me, I think Cleveland's probably going to end up battling right there with Buffalo for that second, third seed in the AFC. And defensively, you have Myles Garrett there on the outside, great young pass rusher. Really love what he brings to the table. So this is going to be a good year for Cleveland. So to me, it's going to be Cleveland and Buffalo that are going to be in that true contender category. So I really like what those two bring to the table. Now, if we look at the rest of the NFL, you just kind of look big picture. You look at things to look at for this year. Obviously, you kind of go around those divisions. Obviously, the AFC East, it's going to be Buffalo's to rule until, to me, I'm not. The Jets are the Jets. Miami, I can't buy into Miami yet because I'm not a big Tua guy. They have talent, not really into what they have, but they're going to put up a fight. So to me, it's going to be Buffalo's to lose until, to me, New England's number 2 in the division. And I think both of those teams, Buffalo and New England, end up getting to the playoffs. I think you have Buffalo going, to me, 14-3 because you have 17 games. New England, I think, ends up going 11-6, getting, to me, I think they get that top wild card spot. And that's what you get out of the AFC East. You go to the AFC North, excuse me. That's where you have, that's where obviously Cleveland is. I think Cleveland takes that division. I think they just eke it out over the Baltimore Ravens. I think that's where Cleveland will go 13-4. Then Baltimore finishes at 12. Excuse me, they finish at 11-6. So obviously Cleveland gets that 2-game advantage. To me, Pittsburgh, because I just don't believe in Ben Roethlisberger anymore. He's toast. He's gone. So for me, it's Cleveland that takes the AFC North. You go down to the AFC South. That division is pretty much, it's all for Indianapolis, depending on their quarterback situation. I mean, Houston is a mess. I mean, we could have a whole nother show on Deshaun Watson and that whole situation, but good luck with that. That's all I have to say. Good luck with that. Now, when we look at the AFC West, I mean, obviously that's the easiest one out of this probably whole group. It's going to be it's going to be Kansas City, and that's by a landslide. I think, to me, they're going to be 15-2, get the top seed. Buffalo is going to be right behind them. To me, that's what I see going on here. So for me, if you recap it, you have Buffalo winning the East, Cleveland winning the North, the Colts winning the South, and you have the Chiefs winning the West. And then for the wild card, I'm going to have New England and Baltimore as the 2 wild card teams. And then go over to the NFC. I mean, the NFC East, that's a dumpster fire. And to me, it's going to be Washington that wins the division again, just because of the defense, because something just doesn't seem right with Dallas, because every year they have talent. And they still find a way to just absolutely disappoint you at every single turn. And it's not going to be the same this year because I just don't. Dak Prescott is still dealing with injuries. I don't see that resolving itself anytime soon. It just doesn't seem like Dallas is going to be able to put it together like they did in 2016 as far as getting to that 13 win mark. I just don't see that happening for Dallas. To me, it's another year where it's going to be another crap division. I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was last year. I think you see Washington winning at 10-7. Other than that, it's going to be yuck. It's going to just nothing. You get nothing out of that division. Then you go over to the NFC North. To me, that's going to be Green Bay wins the division. To me, they're going to get. To me, they get the third seed in the NFC. They go to 12-4, not 12-4, 12-5. Aaron Rodgers has another good year. Not quite what he had last year, but still a pretty good approximation. And then you have the Minnesota Vikings, who they have pretty good young talent, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook. To me, it's going to be what they do on the defensive side of the football. Can they challenge for a wild card spot? Chicago, to me, that's going to be an interesting situation to watch with Justin Fields, how that develops. Because Chicago is going to try to save their bacon as far as Matt Nagy in that front office. So that'll be interesting to watch when it comes to Justin Fields. And I really want to see Justin Fields do well, but there's just something that I think Chicago might end up ruining him there just because they're trying to rush and try to win now with a quarterback that might not be completely ready yet. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe because right now it seems like Andy Dalton might start, but I think they might go to Justin Fields a little too soon. And to me, that would be tough to see because I really want to see him do well. I really do. Even though I wanted him over Mac Jones, I still think that he's not as ready to go yet. So I just hope they don't ruin him. I really don't, because I think he's got a bright future. Just don't ruin it. Please, Chicago, please don't ruin it. And then if you look at the NFC South, I mean, come on, it's Tampa. You don't even have New Orleans to worry about anymore because New Orleans is pretty much gone because you don't have Drew Brees. Yeah, you have Jameis Winston, who threw for over 5,000 yards a couple of years ago, but also threw 32 interceptions along with his 33 touchdown passes. So he's prone to making mistakes, and it's pretty much Alvin Kamara or bust, which I'm leaning on him in my fantasy team. So please be what you have been all these years. But you don't have Michael Thomas. He's on the pup. And then, I mean, the rest of the division's kind of, just crap. I don't think Atlanta defensively has enough pieces, and I don't. And you have an older Matt Ryan. Now you did bring in Pitts, but offensively they're going to be fun to watch. But the rest of the time it's just going to be tough sledding for Atlanta. And then of course you go out to the West Coast, and you have the NFC West. And to me, that is San Francisco comes back to the top of that division. And to me, I think they go back to being the number 2 seed in the NFC. They win that division, and that's going to be a tough division. And to me, I think this is where you see the 2 wild cards come out of, to be honest. I think, like I said, I think Minnesota might fight for one. You might see, I don't see, maybe Chicago, depending on how Justin Fields goes, but I don't see a lot of other playoff teams in these other divisions. So I think this is pretty much you're going to see. This is where I'll call my shot. I see the Arizona Cardinals getting the top wild card, and then you have the Seattle Seahawks squeaking in to that third and final wild card. So that NFC West, I think, is going to have 3 playoff teams. Now it's going to be tough because obviously that whole division has to play each other. So so actually I think I'll amend that. I'll amend it. I think that's where since that division has to play each other a lot, I think that's where the Cardinals will get the top wild card spot, and not the Falcons, but the Seahawks just miss the playoffs, and then that's where Minnesota does squeak in. But that's going to be a tough division. So for me, again, you have the Washington football team winning the East. Then you have Tampa running away with the South. Then you have the Packers winning the North. Not Seattle, but then you have the San Francisco 49ers winning the West. Then you have the two wild card spots out of Arizona and Minnesota. So I like those two teams. I really do. So I think that has a lot to work with there. And then, of course, as we speed through things here, we'll just throw it right out there as with the Super Bowl. I think this is going to be where, it's going to be boring to pick Tampa Bay, but I think Tampa Bay ends up in the Super Bowl again, just because. Actually, you know what? Just thinking about this, now that I'm seeing San Francisco being healthy again, I'm gonna run an audible right now. I think San Francisco beats Tampa Bay in the NFC division, in the NFC title game, because of that defensive front. They're just enough to disrupt Tom Brady. So Tom Brady does not make it back to the Super Bowl. San Francisco goes, and San Francisco plays, drumroll please, the Buffalo Bills. I think this year the Buffalo Bills get past the Kansas City Chiefs with a second year of Josh Allen playing really well. I think you're going to see the Buffalo Bills and San Francisco 49ers. So welcome back to 1995 again, folks. But we're not going to see 1995 style football because the Buffalo Bills can chuck it down the field, and Kyle Shanahan is an offensive genius. So it's not going to be what we saw in 95, but I think I think we're going to see Buffalo v. the San Francisco 49ers. And in this case, sorry, Buffalo, to disappoint you, but this is where I see San Francisco taking the cake and winning the Super Bowl in this one. And I think Jimmy G gets the win. I think Trey Lance, I think he ends up coming in starting at times during the season, but I think this is where Jimmy G gets the victory, but this is more of the defense. So like I said, I know Tampa is going to be a juggernaut, but I just think that the San Francisco 49ers have enough to get past them, and that defensive front is going to be a havoc like we saw in 2019. So I see Buffalo, San Francisco in the Super Bowl. That's going to be my prediction. Now, mark the tape, save it for February when it's probably going to be Tampa versus Kansas City, when it's going to be chalk. That's probably what's going to happen. But just thinking about it, I think that's probably what's going to end up. But that's what my gut just said is going to be San Francisco, Buffalo. But if my brain was talking, it's probably going to be Tampa versus Kansas City, or Tampa, Buffalo for me. But it's going to be hard to stop Tom Brady with that loaded team to not make it back. But that I'll throw my neck out there and I'll say that's what's going to happen. Now, if we're going to talk about MVP for the season, this is where I see a big step forward for Josh Allen, and I think Josh Allen takes home his first MVP honors this year, as he has an unbelievable year. And then the Offensive Player of the Year, I think this is where we see this end up going to Alvin Kamara, because I think Alvin Kamara is going to be the brunt of the offense there. He already was last year, but this year really is. So I think Alvin Kamara is going to be the Offensive Player of the Year. Defensive Player of the Year, this is where it's going to be, again, this is going to be kind of another chalk pick, but with San Francisco being that good on the defensive line, I think this is where Nick Bosa gets Defensive Player of the Year. Offensive Rookie of the Year. This is where this could get interesting here. I think from a standpoint of all those quarterbacks that were taken, this might, I know Trevor Lawrence is going to be the popular pick here, but you're going to have some stiff competition. You're going to have Mac Jones, Trey Lance, and you're going to have Zach Wilson as well. And then you got to throw in Kyle Pitts as well. I think this is where Kyle Pitts, this is where you kind of have the stunner and you don't have Trevor Lawrence win it or a quarterback win it. I think this is where Kyle Pitts is going to be the next generational talent at tight end. He just absolutely lights it up down there in Atlanta. So I'm going to pick Kyle Pitts as the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Defensive Rookie of the Year. This one's a layup, but you can't not do it. It's Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is a stud at linebacker. He's a guy that if the Patriots didn't get a quarterback and Dallas didn't already grab him, I would have said, take Micah Parsons. So that, to me, that's what your awards are, and we already went over the Super Bowl. So that's your wrap for the NFL preview show as far as, well, the NFL preview segment. Now we'll just kind of go out here with a little bit of fun as we'll give you some fantasy football tips, as most of you are probably going to draft either tomorrow, Friday, or over the weekend, or maybe right before the Thursday night game comes for the Bucks and the Cowboys. But the biggest thing I can tell you is know your league. That's the biggest thing. I know it's simple, but you have to know the scoring system. You have to know how your teams are going to be set up as far as, are you a PPR league? Are you a 2-quarterback system? Do you start 2 quarterbacks? Is your flex? Is it a wide receiver, tight end, running back? Do you have 3 wide receivers? Do you have 2? Do you have 1 running back, 2 running backs that you start? And then do you start defensive players individually? Do you start just a defense? How does that work? So pretty much the biggest thing I can let you know is know your league. That's the biggest thing, is because if you don't know your league and you just like, oh, I'm going to take 3 quarterbacks within the first 6 rounds, take 2 wide receivers and don't go get a running back, or you take 4 running backs and you don't get any wide receivers, and you're in a heavy wide receiver league, meaning 3 wide receivers in a PPR league, then that's dumb. You have to be balanced, because obviously running backs are still good. But it's like, if you have to know, obviously we all know that running backs, the top tier running backs, those are the biggest ones, especially the Kamaras, the Cooks, the Henrys, even though Henry doesn't get a lot of PPR points, but basically you know those studs. But it's pretty much don't go out there and have a stupid draft strategy like you've heard before, like, oh, I took 3 kickers or some stupid. Yeah, of course, don't do something like that. Just know your league, know how it scores. That's what I can tell you on that front. And the other big thing here is, I know this is also simple, but in the early rounds, take the sure bet. Don't, if there's somebody that, yeah, like a Saquon Barkley, yeah, he's really good, but he was injured last year. You don't know how he's going to react coming out this year. There's some concerns with that Giants offense. He's a stud, but how well is he going to play this year? So that's where you kind of have to balance it and know, all right, if I have an option between Aaron Jones, maybe Derrick Henry's still sitting there, Ezekiel Elliott, maybe, or maybe you think so highly of Saquon Barkley and you have Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara still sitting there, and it's like at pick 4, and then take the sure bet. And that thing goes for wide receivers as well. No matter what the position is, just take the sure bet early on in that first, second round. Maybe the second round, depending on you might be willing to take a few more risks. But basically, or especially that first round, second round, take the sure bets. Then once you get your stud running back, your stud wide receiver, then that's where you might start to take a little chances. As you get into those later rounds, that's where you can start to take some chances, especially for me, once I kind of get into the sixth, seventh round, that's where I don't mind starting to take more chances on maybe some rookies, maybe a third wide receiver that is in a pretty good system, on a pretty good team, that he could be a breakout candidate. That's where you start to take some of those chances. Don't do it early on. Don't fall in love with somebody that, like, let's just say that you're a Patriots fan and you love Damian Harris. Don't take Damian Harris in the second round. Hell, maybe even the third round, because I think his average ADP is the fifth, sixth round. So don't do it there. Wait until later on. Don't be stupid. Wait till later to take those chances. Now, as far as my last tip for you this week, it's going to be your fantasy breakout stars. And for me this year, my binky for breakout stars, CeeDee Lamb. I think he last year he was overshadowed by Justin Jefferson, who I love. He's my keeper this year in my league, in my league of record, basically in the big league that I really care about. He's my keeper, and so of course I was all over Justin Jefferson last year, but I still love CeeDee Lamb. And to me this year, especially if Dak Prescott can come back and be somewhat healthy, and Amari Cooper's still there, don't get me wrong, but I think CeeDee Lamb is even more talented than Amari Cooper. You're talking about a guy last year who had over 900 yards as a rookie. This is a guy that I think could be ticketed for that 12 high 1200s, low 1300 yardage range in low double-digit touchdowns, 10 to 11. So from a guy that last year, and that's being conservative with him, I think he could be in that 1,400 to 13 touchdown range for the Dallas Cowboys. He's that good. So I think CeeDee Lamb to me is that breakout star. And again, if you're looking for that breakout candidate, especially in the receiver market, look at those second year guys, especially those, like I said, CeeDee Lambs, those Jerry Judys. And then, of course, in Pittsburgh, you have Chase Claypool. So look at those guys who have high target shares, who were putting up good numbers last year, and now they have another year under their belt. Just look; those are your breakout candidates. And to me, CeeDee Lamb is the one guy that I really have my eye on, and I'd love to have him. So those are my fantasy tips for you. And over the course of the football season, that's going to be one of the new segments that we'll install here, is your fantasy tips of the week to help you win your matchup, help you win your league. I'll try to help you out here as I love fantasy football, and it's kind of one of my passions. So we'll throw that in here as a fun segment to kind of break up some of the show. So I hope you enjoyed that NFL preview show. As always, hit the like and subscribe button on YouTube, and hit that like button and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or on SoundCloud, wherever you choose to listen to the show. Or if you decide to follow me on social media, you can follow me, as you can see, at Sean_Met28. And if you're wondering, yes, I spell Sean SEAN. Or follow me on Instagram or Twitter with that link. Or you can also follow the show account on Twitter at NE Sports Weekly, and send me any of your questions that you want. If you have any comments, any concerns, you want to yell at me, whatever, if any feedback's good, anything you want, just send it to me on Twitter, on the show account, and we'll, if it's a good question here, we'll bring it up on the show. And of course, next week going to be a good show, going to be a big show, because we're going to preview week number 1 for the Patriots as they play the Miami Dolphins. That's going to be one of the big things happening there. And of course, we'll get back to the Red Sox, and hopefully we're not all on the top of the Tobin Bridge there, ready to jump off. As hopefully they save their season. Hopefully they bring us off the ledge. So of course we'll follow up with the Red Sox. But until next week, I've been Sean Metcalf, and you have a good one.